Every now and then, viewers of this show get in touch to give feedback. Sometimes they take umbrage at an opinion I've expressed. Sometimes they make suggestions for future guests. Sometimes they just want to praise my exquisite taste in ties. OK, I made that up. But sometimes I've had regular viewers of the show contact me to ask why it is that I so often cover stories relating to transgender activism and women's rights. And I'd like to take this opportunity to explain why. The rise of gender identity ideology is one of the most significant cultural shifts we've experienced in recent years. It isn't just about accepting people for how they want to dress, what they want to call themselves, or how they want to live their lives, none of which anyone has a problem with, but rather that we should reorganise society around the concept of gender rather than sex. And this has major implications for women's rights, because single-sex spaces such as domestic violence, refuge centres, hospitals and prisons depend first and foremost on biology. It also has major implications for gay rights, which were secured through a recognition that will always be a minority of people who are attracted to members of their own sex. When you disregard biology, in other words, you disregard gay rights. Now, I've said all this before, but why does it bear repeating? Well, I'll tell you. It's because GBNews is the only news channel that does so. And this isn't meant to sound triumphalist, it's just a fact. And so I feel it's important to return to this issue on a regular basis, because that media silence most definitely needs to be broken. There have been serious consequences to this negligence in the media. If you ask the average person what they think about the prospect of male rapists identifying as women and then being transferred to female prisons, they mostly won't know what you're talking about. They probably won't believe it has ever happened, but it has. And in a few cases, those prisoners have gone on to commit further sexual assaults. And consider the implications for the sporting world. For a long time, a small group of courageous athletes, people such as Martina Navratilova, Mara Yamauchi and Sharon Davis, have been trying to draw attention to the problem of biological males in women's sports. And they were ignored by the media and called bigots by activists. Kathleen Stock wrote a brilliant book about how women's rights depend upon a recognition of biological sex differences. But it was only when activists hounded her out of her job at the University of Sussex that it made the news. Helen Joyce wrote a best-selling book about this issue. And when I interviewed her on this programme at the time of its publication, she said to me that no other news channel had invited her on to speak. Why not? Well, the truth is that most media outlets have been captured by the new quasi-religion of gender identity, and they have been unwilling to platform voices who might question this belief system. It's like the world of news media has suddenly been taken over by fanatical priests, and all of a sudden we don't hear from the atheists anymore. And this is largely down to the influence of Stonewall, a charity that used to support gay people rather than demonise them as sexual racists, as its CEO now does. And Stonewall has a policy of no debate. Well, they may as well call it no heresy. And so it's hardly surprising that we should get radio silence from those media outlets that are under its thumb. And although GB News is a relatively new channel, a small fish in a big pond, I can at least say that we've done our utmost to draw attention to these issues and offer a platform for those people who are speaking out. And this week, we are seeing that this silence, this journalistic negligence, this failure to enable a public discussion has had some serious repercussions. The trans youth charity, Mermaids, has finally come under a degree of media scrutiny this week. Better late than never, I suppose. You'll remember that Mermaids is a group that recently took LGB Alliance to court in an attempt to have it stripped of its charity status. And why? Because Mermaids takes the view that a charity that defends the interests of gay people is somehow transphobic. This isn't true, of course, but gay people and feminists too have become accustomed to these kinds of slurs. Many years ago, Mermaids used to offer sensible advice to the parents of children who were struggling with their gender. It would suggest a more hands-off approach and pointed out in its literature that in most cases, these feelings of gender dysphoria in childhood would be resolved naturally through puberty. But in recent years, it has adopted the gender affirmative approach, which has resulted in children being fast-tracked onto harmful medication. The majority of these children will have other issues that account for the dysphoria, as I pointed out on this show many times. The studies are absolutely clear that there is a strong correlation between gender nonconformity in youth and homosexuality in later life. So Mermaids has been complicit in an ideology that seeks to fix gender non-conforming children according to heterosexual norms. It has claimed that puberty blockers are harmless and reversible. even though evidence is clear that this is not the case. A recent investigation by The Telegraph revealed that Mermaids had encouraged breast binding for young girls without parental consent. This is a harmful practice that can lead to all sorts of medical problems, including breathing difficulties and broken ribs. Well, the Charity Commission is now investigating Mermaids, and all hell is breaking loose. This charity has been supported by major corporations. Starbucks and Wagamama have previously run campaigns in association with Mermaids, and celebrities have been falling over themselves to declare their approval. But now, tweets are being deleted, evidence erased, because it's becoming increasingly clear that Mermaids, for all that it has been perceived as being progressive, inclusive, and on the right side of history, is in fact regressive, reactionary, and a danger to the very people it purports to help. And it doesn't stop there. Over the past few days, it has been revealed that one of Mermaid's trustees is an academic with a long history of writing in support of paedophilic desire. Now, even the most ardent free speech absolutist must surely concede that these kind of writings should disqualify him from being a trustee of a children's charity. It's clear that Mermaids wasn't undertaking due diligence, but diligence was never the priority here. It was all about the ideology. In the court hearing with LGB Alliance, a representative for Mermaids admitted to having not read the cast review. Now, this was the report into the Tavistock. This is the gender paediatric clinic run by the NHS, which was found to be unsafe for vulnerable children and was shut down. And the chair of Mermaids said in court that the cast review was, quote, not Mermaids' field. Not Mermaids' field. The cast review is one of the most significant reports on the healthcare of children with gender dysphoria that has ever been produced. If this isn't Mermaids' field, then perhaps they should stop sending breast binders to kids. Of course, many of those who supported Mermaids in the past have been conspicuously silent this week. Others have doubled down and declared that Mermaids is being targeted by anti-trans activists. But this isn't true. I've spoken to numerous critics of Mermaids and gender identity ideology more broadly, and not one of them is anti-trans. But of course, there's a lot at stake here. People eventually are going to have to admit that they supported the sterilisation of children, many of whom were simply autistic or were likely to grow up gay. Many decent people have been hoodwinked into supporting this dangerous ideology, and so of course they're going to find this difficult to come to terms with. But sooner or later, they're going to have to face up to reality. Too many people know about it now, and the truth is getting out there. This is what J.K. Rowling wrote in August 2020. An ethical and medical scandal is brewing. I believe the time is coming when those organisations and individuals who have uncritically embraced fashionable dogma and demonised those urging caution will have to answer for the harm they've enabled. Just like the myth of Cassandra, these words were powerfully expressed but largely unheeded. Rowling, in fact, was monstered and smeared as a bigot for pointing this out. And now, 2 years later, people are starting to see that she was exactly right. After the events of this week, it feels like the tide is turning, but this really isn't a time for complacency. Activists aren't going to give this one up without a fight. They're too invested in their fantasies. They have convinced themselves that they have been doing good, even though the evidence now shows that they have been doing harm. They have convinced themselves that they are fighting armies of transphobic hate groups, even though these are mostly just spectres of their imagination. Their actual critics are just women, gay people and their supporters who are concerned about the erosion of their rights and the safeguarding of children. So yes, at the risk of repetition, I'm going to keep talking about this subject because too many in the media are still silent on this issue, and believe me, this is far from over.